Today, we have agave restoration and corridor conservation for bats and people of the American Southwest and Mexico. And we have an empty slide. I'm good at this. Okay. And I'm going to close this and go. There she is. There she is. All right, Kristen, let's see if I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, hello.
Yeah. Can you hear? Yes.
Okay,
All
awesome.
right. And it says it's still recording, so
Okay,
that we're golden. I'm going to have you
perfect.
take it away. And why don't you introduce yourself?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Dr. Kristen Lear. I am the Bat Conservation International spokesperson for today. And I am a lifelong bat lover. I got my start in bat conservation when I was 12 and built bat houses for my Girl Scout Silver Award project. Since then, I've worked around the world on bat conservation and research projects in the US, Australia, Mexico, really around the world, following my passion for bat conservation. So I am going to share today about Bat Conservation International's Agave Restoration Initiative for pollinating bats. And of course, I always like to share a little bit about Bats 101 before I dive in and how we can help bats in our everyday lives. So we should have time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, write them down, and then we'll have time at the end to dive into those. So welcome to the world of bats. Like I mentioned, I am from the nonprofit Bat Conservation International. We are a nonprofit that works around the world to end bat extinctions. We were founded in 1982, so a while ago now. We've been around developing research and conservation projects around the world since then. We were founded in Texas, in Austin, Texas. That was our second stage, and that's where our kind of headquarters is now. And we also have, if you've ever heard of Bracken Cave Preserve in near San Antonio, Texas, that is a property owned by BCI, and it has the largest colony of any mammal in the entire world. It has 15 to 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats that call home Bracken Cave in the summertime. So definitely check that out if you're able, if you ever get down to San Antonio. It's a fantastic experience. So a little Bats 101. Bats are the only flying mammal, the only true flying mammal. Flying squirrels cannot actually fly, they just glide. So bats have that claim to fame. They are found on all continents except Antarctica. So they really are found everywhere. There's 5 species of bats that range up into Alaska. There's bats in Hawaii. They really are everywhere. And there are currently over 1,450 species of bats around the world. They are the second most number of species of mammals after rodents. Rodents and bats are not related. They're actually not very closely related at all. So they are not rodents. They're not flying rats with wings. Now the importance of bats. I always like to talk about why should we want bats around? So 70% of bats worldwide eat insects. They're insectivorous. So they eat things like this poor little moth that's about to get chowed down on. They eat beetles. They do eat some mosquitoes. And so these bats, most bats around the world are eating these insects. And when we think about what service they're providing to us when they do that, these insect-eating bats are huge pest controllers. So they serve as these biological control agents for insect populations. So some really cool math here. One bat, big brown bat, this is an example of a big brown bat. It's estimated that they can eat up to 500 insects per night during the summer months. So a colony of 50 bats would eat about 25,000 insects per night. And there was a study done, published in Science, that actually calculated the economic value of this amount of insects that these bats in the United States are consuming. So in the US alone, every year, bats are consuming and saving the US agricultural industry at least $3.7 billion every year. And this is because many of those insects are pests. There are things like corn earworm moth, pecan nut case sparrow moth, cotton bollworm that are destroying our agricultural crops. And these bats are eating those insects and helping keep them under control. And these bats are contributing $3.7 billion in service to farmers and ultimately to us as the consumer. So thank you, bats, for that. Seed dispersal. So another thing that, another ecosystem service that bats do is spread seeds, particularly of these big fruits that some of these fruit-eating bats eat. And they help spread those seeds very large distances and help regenerate places like tropical rainforests. And these fruit-eating bats, you can see they drink the juice of the fruit, and then they either spit out the pulp with the seeds, or eventually the seeds pass through their system and they poop them out. And those seeds will grow into new plants. And bats are actually one of the primary seed dispersers for tropical rainforests, and they're one of the species of animal that helps get those first plants reestablished in a degraded area. So very important for seed dispersal. And then kind of a lesser known kind of benefit of bats is this inspiration for technological and medical advances. So many bats around the world use echolocation or radar to navigate. Not all bats do. And all bats they all have sight. All bats can see, they have eyes. No bats are blind. But some also use echolocation, and people have developed like vibrating canes, echolocating canes, to help blind people be able to navigate better around by using echolocation in the cane based off of bats' echolocation. This fuzzy picture here, this gray and black picture, is a nectar bat's tongue. So it's one of the pollinating species that eats nectar, and it has a tongue that's covered in these little papilla, or kind of hair-like structures. And those papilla help lap up the nectar. And this kind of morphological coolness has been developed into surgical instruments to help with, in particular, artery and heart surgeries based on this kind of erecting of these papilla of the bat's tongue. And then finally, bats are extremely unique animals. They live very long lives, and they tend not to get cancer. And so there's a lot of medical research going into how can bats live so long, and how can they live long without getting cancer. The oldest known bat in the world that we know of was 41 years old, and that was captured in the wild, and it was an adult when it was caught the first time. Somebody put a band on it, like birders put bands on birds, and then somebody 41 years later caught that same bat again, and it had the band on it. So if we lived the length of a bat based on body size, most bats are very small. They should die young. That's kind of the ecological rule, that if you have a small body size, high metabolism, you die young, 2 to 3 years, like a rodent. So that bat living 41 years old is insane. And if we were to live that long based on our body size, we would be living 180 to 200 years old, which is quite remarkable, and healthy without cancer. How do they do that? So there's a lot of work going into figuring out, can we do any sort of therapies that we can take ourselves to live longer without getting cancer? Oops, there we go. So now I want to shift to kind of the focus of today's talk is pollinating bats. This is the other ecosystem service that bats provide, is pollination. So there are over 100 species of bats around the world that eat nectar and pollen from plants. So about 7% of bats. And about 300 plants or so are pollinated either exclusively by bats or in part by bats. So these bats are very important economic service providers, providing that service of pollination. Now, characteristics of bat-pollinated plants. Obviously, most bats are out at night, so most of these bat-pollinated flowers open at night. They're usually white or pale in color, kind of like moth plants. They have lots of nectar, and they tend to have a stronger smell to help attract bats to them. I love showing this picture because there's a lot of really neat adaptations that bats have. And one of the adaptations that nectar-feeding bats have to drink nectar from flowers is that they often have these very, very long tongues. Can you all see that pink thing coming out of the bat's mouth in the tube? That is this bat's tongue. So this is the bat with the longest tongue in the world. Its tongue is 1.5 times its body length, which is kind of like if we had like a 9-foot long tongue. They have actually a special cavity in their chest where that tongue kind of coils up when it's not in use, so they're not just flapping it around when they're flying. But they use that tongue to get deep into flowers to reach the nectar. Now, I like to talk about comparisons between bats and birds and insects in terms of pollination effectiveness. So here we have a hummingbird that's, been drinking nectar from flowers and getting some yellow pollen on it. But here we have a bat that's been drinking nectar from flowers, and look how much pollen it has on its face and its whole body compared to the hummingbird. So in general, these bats tend to spread more pollen than pollinators like hummingbirds and butterflies and other insects. And importantly, bats tend to carry that pollen farther distances than those other pollinators. So, hummingbird pollinators, when they're foraging, tend to stay within a few miles for foraging. Same thing with insects, much smaller. Bats can fly 30 to 40 miles one way from a roost at night and go feed on all these different plants 40 miles from their roost and then go back to their roost before the morning comes. So these bats are spreading a lot of pollen, and they're spreading that pollen across a lot of different plants and helping maintain healthy plant populations. So pollinator bats are very, very important. Now I want to hone in a little bit on our bats that we're talking about today. So in the United States and down into Mexico, there are 3 species of pollinating bats that migrate between the US and Mexico. We have the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat here. It is endangered in the US and internationally. We have the lesser long-nosed bat, similar species, but a little smaller. And they used to be endangered, but in 2018 were delisted from the US Endangered Species Act. So this is a really good conservation success story. And then we have the Mexican long-tongued bat, which is near threatened and also under threat like all 3 of these species are, and I'll talk about why. So these bats, like I mentioned, range from central and southern Mexico all the way to the southwest United States, most primarily in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. There are some records of the Mexican long-tongued bat up in San Diego County, and the lesser long-nosed bat as well up in very, very southern part of the state. But for the most part, they're in Arizona and eastward. And these bats are undergoing a long distance, over 750-mile migration every year from the southern part of their range up to northern Mexico in the US. And the crazy part is that it's primarily the females that are pregnant that are undergoing this long distance migration while they are pregnant, which is a huge feat in and of itself. And along this migratory route, these bats are feeding on the nectar of agave plants, which I know you all know, the Shaw's agave in San Diego and Cabrillo National Monument. Agave plants are this iconic part of desert and mountain ecosystems where they're found, and they're providing food for these bats. And of course, in turn, these bats are pollinating the agaves. So they're getting their tongues really deep into these agave flowers and drinking that sweet nectar. And like I mentioned, it's primarily the pregnant females that are migrating northward while they're pregnant, and they give birth to their babies in northern Mexico and in the US. And in some areas, so in New Mexico and Texas, agave plants are the only known nectar source, natural nectar source for these bats. So agaves are extremely important to help these mother bats survive and raise their babies. And you can see this giant thing on this mom bat. This is a baby. Bats have one baby per year, usually. Sometimes they give birth to twins, but for the most part, they give one birth once and only have one baby. That's it. And I wanted to show this because in San Diego, the Shaw's agave is this beautiful agave shii, beautiful plant that is blooming. And there is the Mexican long-tongued bat that has been recorded at some people's hummingbird feeders in the county and probably feeding from these agaves as well. So yeah, keep your eyes out. These bats are not very common visitors there, but they have been found there. Now, when we talk about agave plants, agaves are not just important for bats, they're also critical for people. So, of course, tequila and mezcal are what the most kind of famous product that we get from agave plants. But rural communities in Mexico harvest agaves for syrup. For agave syrup, you can find that at the grocery store as well. They use the stalks of the agaves to build fences and houses in Mexico. The leaves of the agaves and the stalks are fed to cattle and goats to help maintain livestock. And then the whole plants here, you can see, are planted as living fences to delineate property boundaries, and also they're planted to help control erosion. So agaves are very important cultural and economic resources as well. Now, I love these pictures because I just think agaves are beautiful parts of the landscape where they're found. They're these really tall, iconic flowering species and really should be protected for their own right, let alone the uses that people and bats get from them. Now, across that 750-mile migratory range of these bats, this is kind of the landscape that we're seeing more and more of. We're seeing bare soil, we're seeing degraded habitat, loss of native vegetation, and loss of these agave plants, which unfortunately is one of the two primary causes of the declines of these nectar bats. So roost disturbance and roost loss is one of the other primary drivers of this population decline. And then loss and fragmentation of these agaves, the foraging resources for these bats. So this endangered bat, the Mexican long-nosed bat, the population has declined by an estimated 50% over the past several decades, in large part due to this loss of foraging habitat. And of course, if we think about people, the loss of this healthy agave habitat and these plants that they rely on also threatens their livelihoods when they're, using these agaves to support their livelihoods. And so this habitat loss and fragmentation is affecting both bats and people. But what if we could turn landscapes that look like this into landscapes that look like this? With beautiful agaves, hundreds of agaves blooming every year, with healthy soils, healthy native vegetation that support these agaves for bats and for people. That is the goal of BCI's Agave Restoration Initiative, is we are working across that migratory corridor to restore these healthy landscapes and the agaves for bats and for people. And we work across that binational corridor. All of these red stars are where we currently have activities happening on the ground through the Agave Initiative to restore these plants for the bats. So it's a truly large-scale effort. And I don't want you to see look at all the logos, but I wanted to show this because this is an all-hands-on-deck effort. We have over 65 partners that are helping with this initiative, including the ejidos, the communities in Mexico, and private landowners in both Mexico and the US. Of course, conservation NGOs. We work with native plant nurseries, state and federal agencies, industry, researchers, you name it. We're working together on this binational nectar corridor. And we're really working at the intersection of wildlife conservation, regenerative agriculture and ranching, land restoration, and rural economic development. As I'll show in a minute, this is not just planting agaves. It's far beyond that, because we have to think holistically about how can we make sure that we're not only planting and restoring these agaves right now, how do we ensure that the conditions are there long term for successful recovery of the land? So we work all the way from seed collection to planting across this corridor. So we work with our local partners to collect native agave seeds to create supply chains of agaves. So once we collect these seeds, you can see with buckets and poles, and you kind of shake the agave and pull some of the seeds down. We get these seeds. We've collected over 1 million seeds from 8 states so far for our restoration efforts and for regional seed banks to make sure that these genetics are saved long term. So once we have those native seeds, we then work with our local nursery partners to grow them. So we work with native plant nurseries in the US, as well as community nurseries in the ejidos of Mexico, to grow out thousands and thousands of little baby agaves that you can see just starting to grow here. And so far, we've partnered with 26 nurseries that we've either supported for agave growing, or we've actually helped build several nurseries for, in particular in Mexico, for the communities to grow agaves and to grow vegetables and medicinal plants for their own uses. And we currently have about 150,000 agaves growing, in addition to ones that we've already planted. So I'll share about that in a minute. So yeah, once these little agaves are big enough to plant, they take usually about 3 years in the nursery to get big enough to go plant. Then we go find appropriate places in the communities and with private landowners to plant these, and then protect them long term so that they will flower for the bats eventually. And so far, we've planted 182,000 of these agaves across the US and Mexico. So this has been quite a long effort since 2018, when we launched the Agave Restoration Initiative. We've gotten 182,000 agaves in the ground, which is pretty awesome. Like I mentioned, so we plant these little baby agaves in the ground, we get them established, but then we have to think long term. How do we make sure that those little babies are going to be in good soil, and they're going to have appropriate water and vegetation around them to grow for 5, 10, 20 years before they flower for the bats? So we work with our local partners to also implement soil and water restoration and regenerative agriculture and ranching practices that support healthy soil and healthy native grasses and vegetation. And so far, we've protected or restored about 14,000 acres of land. And this number is growing a lot as we continue to do livestock exclusion areas, as well as actual restoration techniques on the ground. And then hand in hand with that, we, through our local partners, provide training in regenerative agriculture and ranching and these restoration techniques so that we can enhance the capacity of other nonprofits and community members on these practices so they can continue to do them long term. And through the partners, they have trained over 224 community members and protected area managers on these sustainable techniques. And then kind of taking one more step back, thinking about, particularly in Mexico, working with the rural farmers and the rural ejidos. They are living from the land, and we want to make sure, again, that the agaves that we're restoring are protected long term. So we work to support sustainable community businesses that help people maintain their livelihoods from the land while also supporting the agaves that we're planting. And so we've supported so far 12 of these community-based businesses so that they can continue to use the land sustainably. and make products, some of them make medicinal products, some of them make personal care products that they sell on local markets. And these are all derived from sustainable use of agaves and other plants. And of course, education. Bats tend to get a bad rap. So we do a lot to educate folks about how cool bats are and the importance of bats to agaves, but also the importance of bats in general. And so we do a lot of educational workshops and outreach events in both the US and Mexico. And so far, locally, we've reached over 26,000 kids and adults through all of our local outreach efforts, and over 1.5 million people worldwide through virtual programming. And we also work in Mexico through our partners to train school teachers to learn about bats so that they can then teach about bats in their classrooms. So we're still working on that, but it's a cool program, like train the trainer kind of idea. And then finally, citizen science networks to do bat and agave monitoring. This is something we've been working on developing really cool approaches the past few years. We work in Mexico with camera traps. We set up cameras at blooming agaves to monitor the bats visiting. We also work with community members who have these bat caves, the roosts, on their properties. And we use thermal and infrared cameras with the community members to monitor those roosts of the bats long term. And then a really cool thing that I've been spearheading here at BCI that is kind of a sci-fi thing that I love to talk about is eDNA, or environmental DNA, that we collect to monitor these nectar-feeding bats. So we know that these bats that are feeding on agaves leave behind a ton of spit when they're feeding on the agave flowers, or like in this picture here on the right, when they're feeding on hummingbird feeders. They leave behind a lot of spit, and in that spit is their DNA. And so we can then go out on the landscape and swab agave flowers or hummingbird feeders to see if the bats have visited that plant or that hummingbird feeder. And in that way, we can identify these bats' migratory corridors and see where exactly they're migrating through so that we can then work to restore agaves in those locations. And over the past several years, we've collected over 1,000 samples across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Sonora, Mexico. And drum roll, we have some really exciting results that we recently published. We detected the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat in Arizona for the first time using this eDNA method. So this was really, really exciting to hear that these bats are in in Arizona. We never knew they were before. And then also coming up soon, we have another exciting discovery of this endangered bat in New Mexico that was enabled by the eDNA surveys. So stay tuned for that. We have lots more to talk about, but some pretty cool work. So when I talk about all this agave restoration work, I want to show the star. Why are we doing this work at BCI? We're doing it for these little bats. The Mexican long-nosed bat, being endangered, needs a lot of help. And so that is what we're doing to try to save this bat from extinction and recover it so that it has thriving populations long into the future. And I love to end on this part of my talk on this quote from one of the Mexican community members that I talked to when I was doing my PhD research. He said, "For us, the agave is so noble that it gives us life." These agave plants are the keystone of these bats' lives and of people's lives. So our work is really helping make sure that these agaves thrive long-term for bats and for people. Now, before I open to Q&A, I always like to end on how we can all help bats, because I think I get asked a lot of, what can I do in my everyday life to help? So a few thoughts from us bat experts and things that we do in our own properties. So, gardening for bats. This is something that I highly advocate for because it's pretty easy to do and it can really help bats. So if we think about nectar feeding bats, obviously, planting agaves can help support these nectar bats. But what about the 70% of bats worldwide that eat insects? How can we help them? Well, if we plant night blooming flowers that attract nocturnal insects like moths and beetles, then those insectivorous bats can feed on those insects. So if you plant these flowers that bloom at night and open and attract insects, you can create your own little kind of food chain for the bats in your area. So here is a link, and I'm happy to send these links after the fact. But how to attract bats to your backyard. There's BCI, we have a guide to gardening for bats that talks more about this. But in general, you'll want to plant night blooming, native plants whenever possible. Native is great. Fruit trees often attract bats because they attract a lot of nighttime insects. And then if you can, avoid pesticides, or especially the neonicotinoids, but those are especially harmful. So those are kind of some tips in general. And then on that website that I just mentioned, we actually do have a San Diego bat garden plant list that we've worked with the local groups to identify these plants as good to help support insectivorous bats in San Diego. So again, I can send you all this link afterwards, or you can take a picture now. But these are some great plants to plant in your area. And then if you are able, providing water, a large natural pool or pond is ideal because bats often do drink water, like you can see in this picture. So providing water for them is great. And if at all possible, to provide roosting sites for bats, natural roosting sites like dead trees and snags. These bats will roost up in the crevices. So I highly encourage people to leave these dead trees standing if they're not posing a hazard to, to people or to infrastructure. And yeah, I want to end there and make sure we have time for questions. Please follow us on social media. We're on all the socials. And yeah, I want to make sure we have time for questions. So thank you.
So, yeah, this is great. This is really, really great.
Thank you.
I'm going to take the questions from you and pass them along to, yes, Jim.
We got another native agave to San Diego, Agave desert that grows in Borrego. Curious if they feed on the pollen of that.
Okay.
And also,
He would ask a technical question.
and also saguaros. I know that's feed on saguaros, which is the giant cactus.
Saguaros?
Yeah.
Okay, but there we have another agave. Which one?
Desert ice.
Desert ice.
The one that's native to Borrego.
Native to Borrego. Is this?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear that last
Yes.
part.
So we have another native agave, desert ice, native to Borrego. Is that in this class?
Yeah, so if they're paniculate agaves that branch out with those big branches, yes, these bats will eat from them.
He's saying it is. Okay,
Yep.
and then
Absolutely.
the other was the swirl.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, the saguaros are very important in the spring in particular because they bloom more in the spring and summer. And then in the fall in New Mexico and Arizona, the late summer and fall is when the agave palmeri are blooming there. And that is when the bats rely on those agaves. Yeah, great question.
I love how my name on here is Ken.
I know, I love it. That's great.
Do they bite? We're talking about the bats, not the agaves.
Actually, the agaves do bite. Man, those spines, if you've ever worked with them.
Yeah, we're talking about the bats.
Yeah. Yes, they have teeth. They can bite. They're just like any animal. If you get a stray dog or a cat, they get scared, they can bite. Yes. So we always wear gloves, when we handle them. We're, trained in how to handle. But yeah, Don't pick them up barehanded.
I've got I've got another one, Ernie, back there, Susie.
I know that on the East Coast, there's a white nose disease that a lot of bats have been killed by in the last decade or so.
White nose disease in the
Is that still
east.
a problem?
Is that a
Oh,
problem
yes.
here?
Yes,
Oh,
yes. So if you just Google, there's a map on just white nose syndrome. There's a whole website. So white nose syndrome, what you're referring to, is caused by a fungus that grows in cold caves during hibernation, during the winter. And so bats that go into hibernation will get the fungus on their skin and their nose and their ears and their wings, and it's kind of like an irritant, and it'll wake them up from hibernation in the middle of winter. And then the bats will be hungry. There's no insects around, so they'll either freeze to death or starve to death. And this fungus has killed millions and millions of bats across North America since 2006, when it started in New York State. It has spread westward, including into California, since 2006. And some species, like the little brown bat, are now being listed at or considered for listing for endangered status because they've lost up to 99% of their population, of the entire population of that species, because of this fungus. So
This is why we needed your talk, so that
Yeah.
you could tell us what we could do.
yes, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yay. All right, Ernie, you're up.
You mentioned, I guess, a website that indicates the plants that we could plant around where we
Yeah,
live.
the website.
What is the website that we would go to?
Yeah.
So
And
the short website is batcon.org. I'll put it in the chat. It's Bat Conservation International. It's our website. That's like the main website. And then if you search for gardening for bats, you can find it there. And I can send the links themselves afterwards if that helps, or here.
I will put the links that you send in our newsletter in the
Okay.
meeting report and in the description of our YouTube upload
Yes.
to our site. I will also do that. So
Okay.
there
Let
will
me-
be
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I'll find a link, or I'll put the link in the chat here that you can copy over. That is specific for San Diego County.
Okay, wait.
Let's see, where is that?
Hold on. Let me see if I can show them the
Yeah, I'm trying to find.
batcon.org. I don't know that they can see. Oh, yeah, they might be able to see that. Anyway, okay.
Huh, I'm trying to find. Yeah, I'll find the specific link for San Diego.
Okay. Yes.
Well, I have two questions.
Two questions.
If you put up bat houses, will bats be attracted to them, or do they have to go to caves? Or certain species need to be in caves and certain species go into little bat houses?
Can you hear that?
I can actually. She's close
Woohoo!
enough. Yeah.
I don't
So
have to translate.
yeah, so this is a complicated question. I left bat houses off of my talk because it's kind of a complex thing. It's kind of like the bee houses or bird houses that, people get off of Amazon and they think they're going to save a bird or a bee. But bat houses are complex in terms of whether they actually help bat populations or not. And so in terms of will bats use bat houses, they can. Some species of bats, like big brown bats or Mexican free-tailed bats, which are common in your area, will definitely use bat houses. Like they're common, house dwellers. But in terms of whether bat houses help bats, we don't know. And they can actually in some cases harm bats. So the kind of general tip we give is if you're going to be doing an exclusion of bats from a building, like if you have bats in your attic and you want to get rid of them from your attic, that would be a good time to put up a bat house, because you can then make a really good bat house and put that up before you do the exclusion, give them a place to move to before you kick them out of their current home. So that's kind of how we recommend them being used, is if you're doing an exclusion to offer another roost site. And we do have some information on our website as well about bat houses. And the Bat House Builder's Handbook, I don't have a link to it right now, but
Well, that's a
if
book I
you-
don't have.
yeah, it's just like a little, there's a PDF of it online. And if you just Google Bat House Builder's
Oh,
Handbook,
I'll go right home and get
yeah,
it.
there's some tips and like information about how to build your own. Yeah, so check that out. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I have. Yes, one more.
My other question.
Yeah.
My son lives in the Dominican Republic.
Hmm.
He has so many insects.
Mm.
So I'm thinking, well, if you had bats, then you could control the insects. He has these things all over his yard that are supposed to kill mosquitoes, but nothing works.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if they have mosquito-eating bats in the Dominican Republic.
Oh yeah, yeah. And any of those insectivorous bat species can eat mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are pesky for multiple reasons. Like the bats are not necessarily primarily eating mosquitoes because they're kind of small, right? Most mosquito species are really small. But I know some of them can be big, so the bats might be eating them more because they're so big. But yeah, it definitely does not hurt to have the bats around eating insects for sure. And there are ones in the Dominican Republic that, yep.
So that's
very
why
much.
you want the house. So you need to get that handbook.
Send it to my son.
Okay, send it to your son. I think that's great. Yeah, yes, Susie.
I have one more question. Are you familiar with the work by Dr. Donald Griffin?
Are you familiar with the work?
Sonar?
Are you familiar with the sonar work by Dr. Donald Griffin?
Griffin, yeah, not as much. I'm not an echolocation expert, so I'm not super well versed on that. But yeah, he's done fantastic work.
Lab tech for 4 years in the early 70s, and he was still working with bats and also working on bird migration. So that's
My
one
mind
thing
is
I
being
learned
blown.
about bats. So thank you. This was very inspiring.
She was his lab tech.
I heard something about you or something. Oh my gosh, that is, it's a small
That's
world.
mind-blowing. Oh, wow.
That's crazy. That is pretty impressive.
I'm
That's
going to have
awesome.
you email what you said with all the specs to Kristen directly. Okay, Susie? Thank you.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love fellow bat people.
Yes. This has been fantastic. This has
Thank you.
been really fantastic. And I loved bats coming into this, but I know some people didn't. I won't
That's okay. I
single
understand.
you out, but they loved the agaves. And I had told her earlier that
Mhm.
the agave people were going to like it even if they weren't bat people. But I
Yes.
think everybody's a bat person now because this was
Yay.
fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. And if you're not an agave person either, you should be one. Agaves are near and dear to my heart, so they're beautiful plants as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
super beautiful.
Yep.
And we're done with questions, so I'm gonna
Awesome.
let you go.
Perfect.
And
Well,
if I need anything from you, I know where to find you.
yep. You know where. Shoot
and
me
I
an
can
email
send
and
you that book.
oh yes.
The title. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you
Right.
everyone. Have a good rest of the
Thank
weekend.
you.
Bye everyone.
Bye. All right. I'm ending meeting for all.